You drag yourself through a slit of stone so narrow your ribs scrape against it. The smell of limestone and sweat clings to your face. The air tastes bitter, full of dust that scratches your throat like sandpaper. Your flashlight beam cuts a thin path through the dark, striking fragments of pottery scattered across the cave floor. Behind you, the muffled voices of your team echo in Arabic and English, all nervous laughter and heavy breathing. Every movement sends pebbles tumbling into the void. You have been crawling for hours through the cliffs of Qumran, where the Judean desert folds into the Dead Sea basin like a wound carved into the earth. Your gloves slide over a surface that feels wrong. Not rough like stone, not smooth like clay. It is cold, metallic. You pull back instinctively, then brush away the dust with your fingertips. Under the weak beam of your flashlight, a dull green sheen flickers to life. The object is curved, cylindrical, and scarred with corrosion. Copper. At first, it looks like an old pipe, something that should not belong in a place carved by silence. But the longer you stare, the more it feels alive, as if the desert has been hiding it, waiting for the right hands to uncover its secret. You signal for the others. Boots scuff behind you, shuffling closer. The youngest of the group kneels beside you, his hands shaking as he wipes his brow. The sound of his breath fills the chamber, quick and shallow. He whispers that it might be a container. The oldest among you, a local guide, warns not to touch it. His voice is low, almost superstitious. Some things, he says, are meant to stay buried. You ignore him. Curiosity wins. You grip the edge of the copper cylinder and lift. It groans in protest, grains of sand falling from its seams. It is heavier than you expected, solid as a secret. The beam of light slides across its surface, catching faint lines of Hebrew letters pressed into the metal. They glimmer weakly through centuries of corrosion. Someone curses under his breath. Someone else mutters a prayer. You lean closer, tracing the first line with your thumb. The words are not scripture, they are numbers, measurements, directions, a list. The silence deepens, pressing against your ears. Outside, the wind howls across the cliffs, carrying salt from the Dead Sea. Inside, the cave feels smaller, your heartbeat loud enough to echo. The copper cylinder seems to breathe, as if aware that it has been found. You shine the light one last time across its surface and see a final line etched faintly into the green metal. It speaks of treasure, and for the first time, you realize you might be holding the most dangerous map in history. Then the flashlight flickers, and everything goes dark. The light returns in fragments, thin as breath. You crawl backward through the cave mouth, your knees scraping rock, dragging the copper cylinder against your chest. The air grows warmer, heavier, until the brightness of the desert blinds you. You emerge gasping into a sky of merciless blue. The cliffs of Qumran rise behind you like jagged ribs. The Dead Sea spread below in a haze of white and salt. The air smells of minerals and heat. Your palms sting where the copper has cut through your gloves, leaving green dust that stains your skin. The team gathers around you, faces streaked with sweat and disbelief. One man squints, another shields his eyes with his hat. The artifact sits on the sand like a coiled serpent, its surface catching the sun in flashes of red and gold. The oldest among you steps forward and draws a circle in the dirt with his boot. "Mark it," he says. "Cave 3. His voice trembles between awe and fear. Around him, notebooks open, cameras click, pencils scratch. The desert, which only moments ago had been nothing but silence, now hums with urgency. It is the early 1950s. Across the Dead Sea, war still scars the horizon. The British have left Palestine, and new borders are being drawn by men in rooms far from this heat. Yet here, amid cliffs and salt, history has no boundaries. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls has already stirred nations, faiths, and universities. Each parchment pulled from the caves has been hailed as a voice of ancient scripture, a bridge to the 1st century. But this copper scroll breaks every pattern. It is too heavy for faith, too deliberate for accident. Scholars from Jerusalem, Amman, and Oxford will argue over its origin. Jordanian authorities will claim ownership. Israeli archaeologists will demand access. The Bedouins who first led the way will whisper that the desert has many secrets and that this one carries a curse. Even before it leaves the sand, the scroll has already become a prize, a weapon, a burden. You help pack it into a wooden crate lined with cloth and straw. The copper clinks softly, a sound too human for something so ancient. As you nail the lid shut, dust swirls around your ankles. The jeep waits nearby, its engine idling, a trail of heat rippling above its hood. You glance once more at the cave mouth behind you, now a black scar against the cliffside. The wind rises, scattering your footprints. As the crate is loaded and the jeep begins its descent toward Jericho, the desert stretches endless before you. Somewhere below, the Dead Sea glows like molten glass. Somewhere inside that crate, a secret older than empire waits to be unsealed. And though the world will soon call it an artifact, you know what it truly is. A warning written in metal. The copper scroll travels far from the heat that forged it. Across the Mediterranean, past the ruins of empires, it arrives in England, its crate marked fragile and sacred. At the University of Manchester, winter air seeps through old brick walls. The laboratory smells of oil, metal, and dust. Engineers and scholars stand around a long steel table, their breath visible in the cold. The artifact lies before them, dark and corroded, its edges sealed by centuries of mineral crust. To touch, it feels like trespass. To open it feels like blasphemy. Professor H. Wright Baker, a man whose hands are more accustomed to engines than scripture, runs his fingers over the copper's surface. Beside him, Józef Milik, the Polish archaeologist who helped catalogue the Dead Sea Scrolls, adjusts his glasses. He leans close, tracing the faint impressions of letters through the corrosion. The Hebrew is archaic, written in a form older than the Second Temple. The metal groans softly as they tilt it under the lamplight. It is too brittle to unroll, too precious to leave untouched. Baker decides to cut. The decision divides the room. Some protest that soaring through sacred text is desecration. Others insist that without it, the world will never know what the scroll holds. The professors saw hums to life, a small circular blade spinning faster than thought. Sparks leap as steel meets copper. The air fills with a smell like blood and rain. Tiny flakes drift down, landing on white coats and notebooks. Every cut feels irreversible, every sound louder than reason. The scroll opens not like parchment but like armor. Segment by segment, the metal unfurls, revealing words pressed deep into its surface. No ink, no quill, only engraving. The letters catch the light like wounds filled with fire. Milik leans closer, whispering each phrase in Hebrew before translating. The words are not prayers or psalms. They are instructions, coordinates, numbers. Lists of treasure buried beneath ruins, near cisterns, under temple steps. In the valley of Achor, Milik reads softly, 40 cubits under the stairs, a chest of silver and its vessels. A silence falls over the room, thicker than the English fog outside. The scholars exchange glances, their disbelief struggling against the evidence. The tone of the text is practical, not poetic. Each entry ends with precise measures of gold and silver talents, vessels, ingots. Baker exhales slowly, his hands trembling. What kind of scripture, he asks, measures faith in weight? No one answers. They all understand what it means. This is not the word of God. It is the ledger of men. The copper gleams faintly beneath the lamps, its surface alive with history and danger. Outside, snow begins to fall on the streets of Manchester, while inside, a secret older than empire lies exposed under the hum of electric light. And as the final panel is lifted free, one scholar whispers what the others dare not. "This isn't a holy scroll," he says, "it's a map." The words carved into the copper plates stretch across the table like a code waiting to be broken. Under magnified light, the Hebrew letters emerge more clearly, their grooves deep and deliberate. There are 63 entries in total, each describing a location, a measurement, and a quantity of precious metal. No story, no theology, only instructions. Milik copies the text line by line, his pen trembling slightly as he translates. "In the cistern of the old aqueduct, under the steps leading east, 42 talents of silver." Another line follows. "In the ruin of the valley of Achor, beneath the third chamber, 40 talents of gold." The words flow like coordinates across an invisible landscape. Baker stands nearby, checking his notes, whispering calculations. A single talent, he explains, could weigh more than 70 pounds. Dozens of entries describe treasures that, if taken literally, would amount to tons of gold and silver. The air in the room grows charged. Each line seems to pull the imagination deeper into the past. You can almost hear the echo of shovels, the clatter of metal sealed in jars, the hurried breathing of men who buried wealth to outlast conquest. Every location feels tangible cisterns near Jericho, ruins near the Mount of Olives, and hidden vaults under the temple itself. Yet every description is also maddeningly vague, a riddle written for those who already knew the answers. As the scholars read, they begin to argue quietly. One insists the list is symbolic, a moral ledger recording spiritual virtues. Another believes it an inventory of temple treasures hidden before the fall of Jerusalem. The tension between faith and greed hangs heavy. For some, the words shimmer with divine mystery. For others, they glint with the cold light of human desperation. Baker spreads a map of Judea across the table. His pencil traces the names mentioned in the scroll, connecting them like arteries across the desert. "If this is real," he says softly, "then somewhere out there, under 2,000 years of dust, lies enough gold to rebuild a city." Outside the windows, the winter sky dims to grey. The reflection of the copper gleams faintly on the glass, as though the desert sun has followed it here. Milik closes his notebook and exhales. The weight of history presses down on them all. In that small English laboratory, surrounded by wires and instruments, the air feels suddenly ancient. The past is no longer an idea. It is metal, tangible, whispering of treasure buried in the earth. And as the lights flicker above the table, one thought begins to take shape among them. What if the treasure was never lost at all, only waiting for someone reckless enough to follow the map? The copper scroll's contents ripple through the academic world like an aftershock. Within months, universities, biblical institutes, and newspapers whisper about the treasure scroll of Qumran. Scholars gather in Jerusalem, Amman, Paris, and Oxford, each claiming to hold the key to its meaning. The text has no prayers, no divine invocations, no moral instruction. It reads instead like an accountant's record, a meticulous inventory carved by someone with purpose. The mystery splits the scholarly community in two, those who believe in its literal promise of buried wealth and those who see only metaphor hidden behind measurements. In Jordan, Father Roland Deveau, the French Dominican who directs the Qumran excavations, insists that the copper scroll is genuine yet misunderstood. He believes it lists the treasures of the temple in Jerusalem, hidden by priests before the Roman siege in the 1st century. His tone is measured but certain, rooted in archaeology and faith. Joseph Milik disagrees. To him, the language feels older, less formal, perhaps belonging to a splinter group, the Essenes, the same sect who wrote the other Dead Sea Scrolls. They were ascetic men who renounced wealth. Why, he asks, would such people record a hoard of gold? Across the sea, the English scholar John Allegro offers a different view. Charismatic and controversial, he claims the scroll is exactly what it appears to be, a literal treasure map, an instruction from those who once guarded immense riches. He points to the precision of the measurements, the references to known places near Jericho and Jerusalem. No man writes imaginary directions, he argues during a radio interview. You only give distances when you expect someone to find the path. His words ignite fascination and fury alike. Newspapers dub him the archaeologist chasing God's gold. As excavations resume in the Judean desert, rival teams form. Some dig discreetly under Jordanian supervision, while others scour the hills without permission. The Copper Scroll becomes a relic of obsession, drawing priests, adventurers, and fortune seekers, yet each camp reads it differently. To believers, it is a divine test of humility. To skeptics, a myth born from chaos. No one can prove either wrong. In the archives of Manchester, Baker watches the debate unfold through letters and journals. His own conclusion remains cautious. The scroll, he writes, bears the weight of practical instruction, but its author understood something more than gold. The idea lingers, perhaps the treasure was never meant to be unearthed, but remembered. Outside the academic halls, the desert waits in silence. Its caves are patient, its wind impartial. For every theory raised in lecture halls, the stones of Qumran answer with the same indifference. Somewhere out there, beneath sun and salt, the truth sleeps. Whether it is measured in metal or in faith, no one can yet tell. The story of the Copper Scroll cannot exist without the fire that forged it, long before the archaeologists brushed away its dust, before the scholars argued across continents. Jerusalem burned. In the 1st century, the city stood at the center of rebellion against Rome. The Temple Mount shimmered with gold in the desert light, its courts echoing with chants of faith and fear. But beyond its walls, Roman legions gathered, their banners glinting like knives beneath the Sunday. You can almost hear it, the rhythmic drum of war, the thunder of hooves climbing the Judean hills. The air smelled of smoke and iron. Inside the temple, priests whispered of prophecy and doom. The siege tightened day by day. Grain stores emptied, and the holy city starved. Still, the people clung to ritual. Candles burned through the night, prayers rose with the smoke, and the walls trembled beneath the weight of belief and despair. As chaos closed in, someone began to plan. Gold vessels from the temple treasury, silver trumpets used in ceremonies, tithes collected from across Judea, everything sacred and valuable was gathered in secret. The high priests knew what would happen when the Romans broke through. The treasures of faith would be looted, melted, and paraded through foreign streets. So they hid them, under stairs, beneath cisterns, within ruins that only the faithful knew. The map of these caches was not written on parchment that could burn, nor on clay that could shatter. It was carved into copper, hammered letter by letter, meant to outlast both empire and ruin. In the final days of the siege, the streets filled with screams. The temple's outer walls fell, and fire consumed its heart. Smoke rose high enough to darken the Sunday. Men carried the sacred vessels through tunnels and alleys, burying them wherever they could before being cut down. The copper record, engraved in haste, was sealed within a vessel and hidden beyond the city's reach. Then the Roman general Titus entered Jerusalem. The temple burned, the stones cracked from the heat. The ark, if it still existed, vanished without trace. Months later, the legions marched through Rome in triumph, carrying the spoils of Jerusalem, the menorah, the silver trumpets, and relics of a faith uprooted. But somewhere, buried deep in the desert, one record survived. It spoke of what had been hidden before the fall, a testament to faith turned into strategy, devotion transformed into secrecy. Centuries would pass before another human hand touched that metal, yet the words carved in its surface would still carry the echo of that fire, the last heartbeat of a city that refused to surrender its soul. Decades after the Copper Scroll was first read aloud in that quiet Manchester lab, the desert once again stirred with movement. By the middle of the 1950s, news of its translation had travelled through universities, monasteries, and embassies. Adventurers, archaeologists, and soldiers followed in its wake, convinced that the barren hills of Judea concealed the fortune of the Second Temple. The copper scroll, once locked in museum drawers and guarded behind scholarly caution, became something else entirely, a promise. The first expeditions began near Jericho. Teams carrying shovels and pickaxes traced the instructions engraved on the scroll. In the ruin that is in the valley of Achor, one passage read, 40 cubits beneath the steps. They found nothing but sand, limestone, and the slow whisper of the wind. Undeterred, others came, each interpreting the Hebrew phrases differently. One group dug near Qumran, convinced that an ancient cistern matched the description. Another searched the caves beyond Wadi Kelt, following a line that mentioned the spring of the twin waters. Weeks of labor ended with empty trenches and sunburned skin. Jordanian officials, fearing looting, restricted further searches. Yet secrecy bred obsession. Some expeditions went underground, working by night, their lamps flickering against stone walls. A few hunters vanished into the canyons and never returned. The locals began to whisper that the treasure was cursed, that the desert guarded its own. Even among scholars, the line between faith and folly blurred. Newspapers called it the biblical gold rush. In the 1960s, after the Six-Day War shifted borders once more, Israeli archaeologists renewed the search. Among them was John Allegro, still convinced that the copper scroll was a literal map. He trekked through the Judean wilderness with a small team, using the text as a guide, tracing ancient aqueducts and collapsed stairways. They found pottery, tools, and traces of old settlements, but no silver, no gold. Allegro wrote later that he could feel history mocking him, the desert withholding its truth with deliberate cruelty. By the late 20th century, most expeditions had ended in failure, yet rumors persisted. Some claimed the treasures had already been discovered in secret and smuggled away during the turmoil of earlier wars. Others insisted that the Romans found them centuries ago, their plunder melted down and recast into coins that now lie in museums across the world. A smaller, quieter circle of thinkers began to wonder if the scroll was never meant to guide a hand at all, but to protect a memory. The desert keeps its silence. The caves of Qumran remain still beneath a sky that has watched civilizations rise and vanish. Somewhere under that same sand, perhaps the scroll's words still point toward chambers sealed before history learned their names. Or perhaps the real treasure was never gold, but the endurance of hope itself. And as the sun sets over the salt plains, the hills glow like embers, and for a fleeting moment, the land looks exactly as it must have when the first diggers came, chasing a legend that still refuses to be found. You stand on the edge of the desert at dawn, the Dead Sea glimmering below like molten glass. The air is still, yet beneath that stillness runs a hum that feels older than time. It is not the wind or the insects, but something more human desire. It is the same pull that drove priests to carve a ledger in copper, explorers to dig through centuries of sand, and scholars to argue over meaning until their voices cracked. The copper scroll has become a mirror, reflecting humanity's oldest hunger, the need to possess what cannot truly be owned. For the Essenes, it had been faith. They withdrew from the corruption of the world, seeking purity through isolation, convinced that endurance was holier than conquest. Their treasure was the preservation of truth. Yet, when the Romans advanced and their world burned, even they turned to metal. They recorded what they could not protect. They buried wealth to save it from defilement, turning belief into strategy. And in doing so, they left behind a question that would haunt the ages. Was it piety or fear that made them hide their gold? Centuries later, that question has changed its costume but not its essence. The priests became scholars. The pilgrims became archaeologists. The relics of faith became museum artifacts. The same hands that once lifted torches now hold cameras and trowels, chasing not salvation but discovery. Yet beneath the careful language of research lies the same restless need. Some dig for knowledge. Others dig for proof. A few dig because they cannot bear the thought that mystery might remain unsolved. The copper scroll stands at the center of it all, a riddle that refuses to surrender. Its language is sparse, its meaning elusive, but its power is undeniable. Every generation that studies it feels the same heat that once rose from the temple fires a promise that somewhere, beneath dust and ruin, something sacred still waits. And perhaps that is the true allure. Not the gold itself, but the idea that there is something in this world too precious to lose, too stubborn to vanish. In a way, the scroll has already fulfilled its prophecy. It has unearthed a different kind of treasure, obsession, curiosity, and the will to search, even when the world says, stop. Its words have outlasted kings, wars, and empires. They have proven that faith and greed often share the same heartbeat. As the sun climbs higher, its light glints off the hills of Qumran, turning stone into bronze and sand into gold. The same illusion that lured ancient priests now flickers in your eyes. You blink, and for a moment you see what they saw, the shimmer of eternity disguised as metal. You reach for it instinctively, but the light fades, and the desert takes it back. In a glass case under soft museum light, the copper scroll no longer gleams with the arrogance of legend. Its surface is split, its color a mottled green and brown, like the skin of something ancient that refuses to die. The museum guards whisper to tourists that it is priceless, though even that word feels small against its gravity. Inside the Jordan Museum in Amman, where it now rests, the air is cool and still. Every few minutes, a visitor leans close to the glass, their reflection merging with the faint shimmer of letters carved 2 millennia ago. Curators work in quiet reverence. They wear gloves and speak in low tones, as if the metal can hear. Nearby, digital screens display scans of the scroll, each letter rendered in light. Scientists from Jordan, Israel, and Europe collaborate across borders that once divided them. Using three-dimensional imaging and spectral analysis, they study the depth of every groove, the angle of every strike. They discover that the engraver used at least 2 different tools, alternating between fine chisels and wider blades. The pressure of each cut tells a story, the urgency of a man working quickly, perhaps in fear, yet determined to make every word endure. Outside the museum, the city hums with life. Buses rattle through traffic, markets spill into the streets, and vendors shout in Arabic, selling copper trinkets that gleam in the sunday. None of them know that the real treasure lies only a few rooms away. The contrast feels deliberate, as though history itself is laughing softly at the irony. What was once hidden in darkness is now displayed under electric light, and still, no one truly understands it. In recent years, new technologies have revealed minute details that once escaped human eyes. Laser imaging exposes traces of fingerprints pressed faintly into the copper, likely belonging to the craftsman who hammered it flat. Microanalysis reveals flecks of sand from the Judean hills trapped within the corrosion. It is as if the desert itself clings to the metal, refusing to let go. Each discovery brings scientists closer, yet the greater mystery only widens. The copper scroll has become more than a relic. It is a bridge between worlds, between faith and reason, religion and archaeology, legend and science. Once guarded by priests and prophets, it now belongs to everyone. Its story is told in classrooms, documentaries, and museum halls. Scholars write papers on its syntax, while visitors whisper prayers in front of it, uncertain whether to call it history or miracle. As evening falls, the museum lights dim, and the last visitor lingers before the case. The letters carved into the copper glow faintly beneath the glass, still alive in their quiet defiance. For all the study, all the technology, all the centuries of longing, the scroll remains what it has always been, a question carved in metal. And though its treasure was never found, its endurance has become the treasure itself. The copper scroll rests in silence, but its voice still carries. Every scholar who leans over its surface feels the same sensation, a pull, a whisper, an invitation that refuses to end. For more than 70 years, the words engraved upon its copper skin have been studied, argued, and translated, yet no one can agree on what they truly mean. Its instructions are clear but incomplete, its locations vivid yet unreachable. Every clue circles back into the same enigma. Did someone carve the world's first treasure map? Or did they create a monument to faith disguised as one? Modern historians trace the scroll's phrasing and discover fragments that link it to priestly language from Jerusalem's temple. Others insist the grammar resembles the dialect of the Essenes, the silent scribes who hid their writings in the caves of Qumran. Both are possible, yet neither fits completely. Like the desert that hides and reveals, the copper scroll sits between worlds religious and secular, symbolic and literal, sacred and material. It refuses to be owned, just as the gold it describes refuses to be found. Some say its true power lies not in the treasure itself, but in what it represents, the lengths to which humans will go to protect what they love. The priests may have hidden their wealth to save it from Rome. The Essenes may have buried it to keep the profane from touching the sacred. The scholars of the 20th century risked their reputations to decipher it. And the dreamers of the 21st still trace its coordinates on satellite maps, their imaginations as fevered as any zealot's prayer. The scroll has become both myth and mirror. Its existence proves that the line between belief and obsession is perilously thin. Faith once carved into copper now reflects in screens and simulations, but the longing remains unchanged. We are still the same species that buries meaning in metal, hoping someone someday will uncover it. In the museum at night, when the lights dim and the corridors fall quiet, the copper scroll seems to shimmer faintly in the dark. The engraved letters catch the last gleam of passing headlights from the street outside. If you listen long enough, you can almost hear what the desert once whispered through the cave's silence, a promise or a warning. It is impossible to tell. Perhaps the scroll was never meant to lead anyone to gold. Perhaps its true message was simpler, more human, that all things faith, treasure, knowledge, love must be hidden to survive. And as the centuries turn and new seekers rise, the copper endures, patient as stone, holding its secret just out of reach. Because some mysteries are not meant to be solved, they are meant to be remembered. Night falls over the desert, and the cliffs of Qumran fade into shadow. The air cools, the wind carries the scent of salt and stone, and for a moment the world feels as silent as it must have when the first torch was lifted inside the cave. Somewhere beneath that same earth, there are still chambers no one has touched, stones that remember the heat of ancient hands. The copper scroll may lie safely behind glass now, but in spirit, it still belongs to this place, the land that kept it secret through empire, war, and time. In the museum, the last guard passes by the display case and pauses. The faint glow of the copper catches his eye, its green patina soft under the light. He doesn't know the words carved into it, yet something about them feels alive, like a heartbeat pulsing beneath the metal. Outside, traffic hums through modern Amman, but in this quiet corner, the past still breathes. The scroll does not speak, but it hums with the memory of chisels, of dust, of men who carved their hope into permanence. Perhaps that is its real treasure, not the gold it describes, but the endurance of longing itself. It reminds us that humans have always hidden meaning in what they cannot understand. The Essenes hid their scriptures from corruption. The priests buried their vessels from conquest. The scholars sought the truth in fragments of letters. And all of them, knowingly or not, were searching for the same thing, something that would survive them. Under the faint hum of the museum's lights, the copper scroll waits. It does not need to be read to be understood. Its very existence is enough a declaration that words, once set in metal, can outlast empires and disbelief alike. In the stillness, you can almost hear the echo of that cave, the clink of a chisel against copper, the quiet prayer of a hand that believed the world might one day listen. The wind that sweeps through the desert tonight carries that sound still, soft but unbroken. Empires will rise and fall. Faith will scatter and rebuild. But somewhere, Beneath the weight of history and salt, the copper remembers. And in its silence, it whispers back to time itself.